She stood alone at the crosswalk no one wanted to notice. A white, blind girl in a soaked school uniform, clutching a white cane like it was the last unbroken truth in a world that kept moving without her. Cars roared. Horns screamed. Rain drilled the pavement as if the city itself had decided that compassion would be delayed due to weather. People swerved around her, umbrellas tilted like shields, some muttering that someone else would help, some narrowing their eyes, most pretending they hadn't seen anything at all. And then he saw everything. A poor black teen with duct-taped shoes, a folded bus ticket plan in his head, and exactly enough money to get home with his grandmother's insulin still waiting at the pharmacy. He had reasons to hurry. He had 100 excuses to keep walking. Instead, he ran. His name was Darius. The city liked to measure him by what he didn't have: 2 parents lost in a crash, a savings account that always read 0, a schedule that never gave him a childhood, but counted wrong every time. What he had was character, so steady it felt like bedrock. As a truck slid through a shimmering veil of rain, as the crosswalk signal malfunctioned, as the crowd tensed but stayed still, Darius threw his body between danger and the girl. He grabbed her shoulders, gentle but firm, steering her back to the safety of a bus shelter while the truck fishtailed past in a storm of spray and startled curses. The girl's breath came in tiny, startled staccatos. "I couldn't hear," she whispered. Everything sounded wrong. Darius shrugged off his thin jacket, his only armor against the storm, and wrapped it around her shoulders like a promise. Her name was Emma. Her driver had suffered a medical emergency. Her phone had died. The city, which usually organized itself around her needs, had become a maze of sound and fear. "I'm Darius," he said, voice low so she could follow it through the noise. "You're safe." He checked her student ID with permission. Whitmore Academy, an upscale address in a part of town where lawns were curated and gates had names. Darius did the math. Bus fare for 2 to Lincoln Park would cost exactly what he had left. Getting back would cost more than he had. The storm pounded. A text from Nana. "Be safe, baby. Don't forget my insulin. Kesha needs help with homework." He pictured his little sister counting on him, his grandmother rationing a dose to stretch tomorrow into next week. He pictured the girl's knuckles, white on the cane. Then he stopped picturing and decided. He waved down the bus and paid for both of them. People stared, some with curiosity, some with that subtle contempt reserved for kids who look like they don't belong in certain zip codes. Darius kept his eyes on Emma, not the looks. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because I can," he said simply, almost apologetically, like kindness needed no monologue. She laughed once at his description of Kesha's dream of becoming an astronaut. He smiled when she described the elaborate music lessons she disliked. They were from different worlds, but met perfectly in the small, human place where fear is soothed by presence. Lincoln Park rose like another country. Iron gates, a fountain like a movie scene, security cameras that never blink. When the guard rushed out, "Miss Emma," and the mansion lights began to glow, Darius stepped back from that threshold. He didn't want a reward. He wanted 2 things: to know Emma was safe and to walk the 3 stormy hours home without worrying his family too much. Emma fished out a wallet, offered him a wad of cash with innocent urgency. "You'll need a taxi back," she insisted. He shook his head. "I helped because it was right." She drew a breath that sounded older than her years, then pressed a silver keychain into his palm. Engraved, weighty, not flashy, the kind of object that says, "Remember this moment." "My grandfather used to say kindness should be remembered," she murmured. Her parents appeared, a flood of relief and gratitude. Questions, praise, an offer to pay him back for the fare and the lost time. Darius didn't budge. He asked for nothing, nodded once, and turned away into the rain, the silver keychain warm against his skin. Behind him, the gates closed with the soft certainty of wealth. Ahead of him, 3 hours of rain and 100 small risks waited on every block. He thought about Nana's insulin. He thought about Kesha's homework. He thought about how hard tomorrow would be at work if his shoes didn't dry by morning. And still he walked. That night, Nana didn't scold. She folded him into a hug that said every sacrifice had a witness. He told her the short version. He always did, because protecting people sometimes meant sparing them the heavy parts of the story. But in a mansion miles away, Emma told everything. "He refused money," she said. "He gave me his jacket. He spent his last dollar just to get me home." Her father listened. Her mother wiped her eyes. Someone made a phone call. Someone opened a file. Somewhere, a foundation policy written 70 years ago stirred like a sleeping giant reminded of its purpose. The city thunder thinned into a quiet that felt like a held breath. The storm had ended. Something bigger had begun. By Friday afternoon, the city had already moved on. But the Whitmore Foundation had not. While Darius stacked cans in the back aisle of Murphy's Corner Grocery, while he kindly rebagged a customer's groceries because cheap plastic had betrayed them, while he asked for an extra hour to buy insulin before the pharmacy closed, a quiet network turned its attention toward him. Calls to his school. Discreet questions to neighbors. His manager gave a stunned testimonial. This kid shows up on time and leaves when there's nothing left to do, not when the clock lets him. Teachers described a brain that solved the hard math before the chalk stopped squeaking, a heart that stayed behind to tutor classmates even when his own lunch break vanished into other people's problems. The file grew, not with gossip, but with evidence of character. At Washington High, a guidance counselor pulled his records and saw a different kind of perfect attendance. Days when he shouldn't have been able to come, but did. Test scores high enough to argue with the rent. In their cramped apartment, Kesha drew rockets on a cereal box and told Nana, with scientist certainty, that space didn't feel so far when Darius explained it. At the foundation boardroom, Emma's small fingers tapped a folder every time someone referred to the subject. His name is Darius, she corrected gently, the kind of gentle that rearranges a room. He didn't see money. He saw me. When the Whitmores entered Murphy's, the floor manager did a double take. Emma beamed. Darius's heart skipped. He wiped his hands on his apron, caught somewhere between suspicion and hope. Is Emma okay? He asked first, because that's who he was. She's more than okay, her father said, extending a hand and introducing himself in a voice that could move markets and soften to gratitude in a single sentence. We'd like a moment in private, if you can spare it. In a break room fragrant with coffee and cardboard, Darius sat across from people who belonged to a world so distant it might as well have been a constellation. He braced for the shape of a shoe to drop, a lawsuit, a misunderstanding, an expensive mistake. Instead, he was handed the file. We look for people whose first impulse is to serve, Mr. Whitmore said. Our foundation exists because someone rescued my father when no one else did. We repay that debt by investing in character. Emma leaned forward. I asked them to find the person who helped me and refused payment. She said it like a simple fact, but the room tilted around the weight of it. Darius looked down at the papers, teacher quotes, report cards, the manager's note in scratchy pen. He gives the good shifts away when others need them. He stared so hard the letters blurred. He tried swallowing. It didn't work. I don't want charity, he said, voice rough with the dignity of a kid who'd earned everything he owned. We don't offer charity, Mr. Whitmore said. We offer investment. The words that followed rearranged the architecture of Darius's future. A full scholarship to an engineering program he'd only discussed in the quiet, room-temperature dreams you don't say out loud when rent is due. Paid housing. A laptop that wouldn't shut down mid-assignment. A monthly family stipend so Nana's medicine stopped being a math problem. Tutoring for Kesha, not as a gift, but as a runway. Automatic health coverage. Connections to internships that hired for heart and trained for skill. Why me? Darius asked, because nothing in his life had taught him to expect mercy at this scale. Because you looked at me and saw a person, Emma said. Everyone else saw a problem. Nana cried when he told her. Messy, grateful tears that made Kesha beam like the sun showed up inside their living room. The apartment, for the first time in forever, felt bigger than its walls. At school, classmates slapped his back with mouthed congratulations, and a few with embarrassed apologies for old jokes that hadn't aged well. The landlord, suddenly polite, mentioned a quick fix to the building's endless heat problem. Instant karma arrived with subtlety. A teacher who had once assumed Darius was not college material asked to shake his hand. The grocer who had sniped about kids today raised his pay on the spot and, more importantly, raised his expectations for every other teen he hired. The world didn't change in one cinematic swell of music. It clicked, one small gear at a time. That night, Darius set the silver keychain beside the scholarship letter, a relic and a promise. He texted Emma, "Thank you for believing that doing the right thing matters." She replied instantly, "It mattered before the scholarship." The scholarship just proved other people see it too. Outside, the city's neon buzzed. Inside, a future took shape with lines so sharp he could trace them with his finger. He slept for the first time in months without a budget spreadsheet haunting the edge of his dreams. The foundation campus felt like a cathedral to possibility. Marble floors, high glass, a wall of framed faces. First-generation graduates, journalists, pediatric surgeons, electricians who started companies named after their mothers, social workers who rebuilt neighborhoods one block at a time. Emma guided Darius's hand to an empty space on the wall. "This is where your graduation photo will go," she said with the enormous faith of a 12-year-old who has decided the world should be better and doesn't accept objections. In the conference room, the board greeted Nana like family, not like charity, and treated Kesha like tomorrow's headline. They didn't give speeches. They gave specifics. A move-in date to a safe, clean 3-bedroom apartment with a working stove. A health plan that delivered insulin without an apology. A summer bridge program at Northwestern that sounded like boot camp for brilliance. A mentor who'd grown up as poor as Darius and now designed bridges that turned river crossings into poetry you could drive over. "We're not buying you an outcome," Mr. Whitmore said. "We're building you a scaffold." Darius breathed through it. The schedule, the support, the expectation that he would succeed not because someone pulled strings, but because someone finally moved the boulder from the road. They toured campus that afternoon, labs that hummed, quiet study rooms that smelled like coffee and ambition, an engineering building buzzing with the collective voltage of people who believed problems could be solved with code and courage. A professor with chalk on his sleeve shook Darius's hand and said, "I hear you're the kind who keeps tutoring after the test is over." "Good. We like that kind." A student ambassador whispered, "If you need a part-time job, I know a lab that pays in free pizza and recommendations." On the walk back, they passed a group of students advocating for accessible transit. Ramps that weren't afterthoughts, signals that weren't confusing, sidewalks that didn't turn into obstacle courses for people who couldn't see. Darius listened with the slow dawning of a plan. Engineering wasn't just about building things. It could rebuild the way a city treated its most vulnerable residents. Instant karma tapped other shoulders. The landlord who had taped an eviction notice to their old door 2 days earlier got a calm phone call from the foundation's legal team. The notice vanished, replaced by a written apology and a clean deposit refund that arrived faster than rain drains in a storm. The store customer who'd mocked Darius's taped shoes came back with a pie and a letter confessing that, "Watching you on the news made me realize I've been seeing people all wrong." Darius accepted both with grace. Karma wasn't about revenge. It was about realignment. In the new apartment, Kesha ran a fingertip over the smooth desk that would hold her first real telescope. Nana opened the refrigerator to find it stocked with actual food that didn't threaten to run out midweek. Darius stood in a quiet, separate bedroom and took a deep breath that went all the way to the bottom. Hope didn't hurt anymore. It healed. On the first day of the summer bridge program, he got lost, because true new beginnings always include at least one wrong hallway. A grad student with purple hair and a calculus tattoo pointed him to the right lecture. "Don't worry," she grinned. "All the best stories begin with a left turn." He found the classroom, touched the silver keychain in his pocket like a superstition, and took a front row seat he had earned in blood and rain and stubbornness. The professor began, and Darius's pen moved like it had been waiting for this day since the moment someone said he wasn't college material. He solved something difficult, then explained it to the guy next to him without bragging, because character doesn't upgrade when your circumstances do. By the time he rode the train home, Chicago felt different, still tough, still loud, but friendlier around the edges, like a face you know can smile. He passed the intersection where it had started. The traffic light blinked green, steady as a heartbeat. He smiled at the crosswalk as if it were an old friend. Tomorrow, he decided, he would sketch a safer audible signal tucked into a phone app that didn't require a data plan. The city might ignore the invisible. He would not. The footage hit the internet like a fuse finding flame. A grainy clip of a kid sprinting into an intersection, rain slicing sideways, a small figure with a white cane frozen in place. Someone overlaid a caption. He spent his last $3.50 helping a stranger. Watch what happens next. Views climbed in the shape of a miracle. News crews called. Talk shows asked the same question in different words. Why did you help? Darius answered the same way every time. Because she needed it. He refused to say anything unkind about the people who had done nothing, because shaming the past rarely changed the future. Instead, he talked about Nana's saying, "Do right even when life isn't doing right by you," and the way kindness could be a habit, not a headline. Emma spoke softly on camera and loud in effect. "He didn't treat me like a symbol or a story," she said. "He treated me like a person." In comment sections that often eat optimism for breakfast, something gentle took root. People wrote about the time a stranger jumped a dead battery at midnight, the woman who paid a grocery bill quietly, the nurse who sat long after her shift ended because the family needed someone to say the hard thing kindly. The algorithm nodded. Compassion was trending. With visibility came friction. A cynical blogger suggested it was a PR setup. The foundation calmly released a simple timeline and excused itself from the drama. The blogger, confronted with facts, posted a correction that doubled as an apology. Instant karma didn't cancel him. It invited him to do better, and, surprisingly, he did. A week later, he ran a feature on low-cost accessibility tech Darius was tinkering with in the dorm lab, a free app that translated traffic sounds into haptic cues and synced with cheap earbuds. Emma beta tested, grinning when she navigated a busy corner without the old spike of fear. Back at school, Darius kept doing what he'd always done. He showed up. He studied until understanding felt like a sunrise. He led a study circle with a rule: no one leaves confused. He volunteered every other Saturday at a community center, running a Build It workshop where kids designed tiny bridges from popsicle sticks that somehow held outrageous weight. Then a teacher whispered to him, "You're doing with glue and patience what the city failed to do with policy. You're holding together what matters." He blushed. The work wasn't a sermon. It was joy. And still, the story radiated. Murphy's Corner added a bulletin board labeled, "Good finds good." Customers taped up notes about kindness they'd spotted that week. A bus driver who waited for a running mom with a stroller, a teen who translated for an elderly man at the clinic, a mechanic who fixed a nurse's car for free because every shift saved a life. The store's profits rose. The owner raised wages and started a scholarship jar at the register. You couldn't buy a gallon of milk without noticing the way kindness multiplies. The landlord who had once been unmovable about late fees called to say the building's broken lock had been fixed and the lights were now stable. No one clapped. Everyone slept better. Real karma makes the world run smoother without asking for a parade. Nana's insulin arrived like clockwork. Kesha's shoes had soles that didn't whisper about rain. Emma's school asked her to speak about inclusion, not because she was an exhibit, but because she'd become an expert in her own lived experience. She said one sentence that made administrators take notes. Accessibility is love made practical. Darius started to believe what others now assumed, that he belonged. Belonged in a lecture hall, at a lab bench, on a panel about building kinder cities. In a world where his goodness wasn't the exception, it was the assignment. A year to the day after the storm, the city returned to the crosswalk that had taught it a lesson. Sunlight pooled on the asphalt. The mayor read a proclamation. A small crowd shuffled closer, phones raised, kids hoisted onto shoulders. The new sign went up with the satisfying click of a bolt finding the right thread. Choose Kindness Corner. The plaque beneath it said, "In honor of every person who stops when others keep walking." Darius stood beside Emma, their families ringed around them, the Whitmores in quiet tears, Nana in a church hat that meant the day was holy. They told the story, not as a viral clip, but as a liturgy of details that made the truth undeniable. A jacket shared, a bus fare spent, a long, wet walk home, a noon phone call that replotted a boy's life, a silver keychain that felt heavier than it looked. Even the most hardened city employee softened when Kesha tugged the microphone down and declared, "My brother says heroes are just people who keep choosing." The crowd cheered, not for the sign, but for the mirror it held up. Then it happened, something unscripted that made the dedication feel like prophecy. An elderly man stumbled near the curb. Before anyone could gasp, a teenage girl darted from the edge of the crowd, steadied him, checked his balance, and walked him to a bench in the shade. She didn't look around for approval. She just did it. Emma laughed through a sudden burst of tears. "See," she whispered. "It's working." In the weeks that followed, corners around the city began to change. Volunteers painted curb cuts that had been chipped for years. A local tech collective took Darius's app and added a feature that signaled crossing times via gentle vibration. A group of retired engineers built simple, low-cost tactile maps for bus stops and trained students to install them. An alderman, known for caring more about ribbon cuttings than benches, redirected budget to fix 5 dangerous intersections. He smiled in every photo, but the real picture was quieter. Mothers crossing with strollers, a blind neighbor stepping off the curb without bracing, teenagers slowing at yellow because it was the right thing to do. Instant karma found softer targets too. A snide online comment about performative kindness got buried under thousands of stories from strangers whose lives had been saved by small acts. The commenter eventually posted, "I was wrong. Yesterday someone helped my mom when she fell. I get it now. Transformation by testimony. It works." Back on campus, Darius brushed chalk dust from his palms and designed a capstone project that made his advisor whistle. An open-source framework for cities to retrofit accessibility using off-the-shelf parts, community training modules, and tiny budgets that added up to giant dignity. The project didn't tear down a city to rebuild it. It simply asked the city to notice its people and then choose better. Emma took the prototype and tested it in her neighborhood, voice steady as she narrated each finding for the engineers. They listened to her because she wasn't a box to check. She was the point. On the anniversary evening, after the cameras left and the sun soaked into brick, Darius and Emma sat on the bench beneath the plaque and said nothing for a while. Silence can be the kindest friend. Finally, Darius pulled out the silver keychain and the gold one he'd been given when his acceptance letter came. He turned both in his hand, 2 small orbits around a single truth. "You know what I think," he said. "I think most people want to be good. They just need a first step." Emma tapped her cane once on the concrete. "Then keep building steps." By the time Darius walked across the graduation stage, the wall at the foundation held his photo in a simple black frame, lined up with faces whose names you might never know, but whose work you've already felt. The teacher who stayed until a kid believed in algebra, the nurse who changed a clinic's policy so people stopped slipping through cracks, the city worker who changed a routing schedule and cut bus wait times where people didn't have cars. He shook hands, accepted a diploma whose weight didn't scare him, and looked up to find Nana crying like redemption, Kesha whistling like a human trumpet, Emma standing with her cane, and a grin so bright the room reflected it. He didn't do a victory lap. He went to work. The accessibility framework went live in 3 neighborhoods first, then 10, then more. Chicago changed, not by decree, but by volunteer nights and skill shares and city departments that incorporated empathy into procurement. Other cities called. He and Emma built a traveling workshop named for the corner, a one-day pop-up that trained local teens to audit their blocks for barriers, code simple fixes, and advocate smart. The kids did not disappoint. The wrong-sized ramp that had mocked wheelchairs for a decade vanished under a Saturday morning crew and reappeared in the correct slope by lunch. A crossing signal that had coughed static for months started singing a clear tone. A sidewalk crack the size of a story got patched. Small change wasn't small. It was daily bread. Instant karma matured into something deeper, instant community. People who had complained about the city started calling it our city again. A cop who'd watched too many harsh videos signed up to help install tactile pavers on his beat. A business owner who once rolled his eyes at strollers became the unofficial crossing guard during the school rush. A late-night DJ added a segment to his show, Kindness Traffic, spotlighting corners that needed love and the crews already heading there. Years later, Darius and Emma returned to the bench for a quiet evening before a big presentation. The foundation had invited them to propose an expansion, a national program pairing engineering schools with communities to implement low-cost accessibility fixes, funded not by pity but by pride. They didn't rehearse. They remembered. The rain, the bus, the silver keychain, the walk that hurt and healed. The mansion gates opening not into wealth, but into responsibility. Funny, Darius said, how the moment that looked like a detour turned out to be the road. Emma tilted her face toward the warm air, feeling the city the way she always had, through sound and wind and the certainty of a friend beside her. The road was always there, she said. We just cleared it. Their proposal passed without theatrics. It didn't need music. It had evidence. Graduation rates in pilot areas up. Pedestrian injuries down. Civic participation climbing. The board voted yes. The program launched. The map on the wall lit with little pins that meant corners were being chosen in places they'd never been. And in the donor reception line, a man with tired eyes and a crumpled suit waited his turn, then pressed a simple, engraved brass keychain into Darius's palm. My daughter, he said, voice breaking, was lost at a station. A kid walked her to safety and refused money. I wanted you to have this. For remembering. That night, Darius wrote a note he'd been meaning to write since everything started. He thanked the bus driver who waved them on in the storm. He thanked the store manager who gave a reference that made a board trust a boy they'd never met. He thanked the commenter who changed his mind publicly. He thanked the city for teaching him that cynicism is often a scar, and scars can still stretch to let joy in. He ended with one line he hoped would be said at corners forever. When you help, the world learns your name by the way it treats people afterward. The next morning, he and Emma walked to the corner before the cameras arrived. Someone had tucked a small bouquet of wildflowers into the plaque bracket. A child had taped a drawing beneath. 2 stick figures, one with a cane, one with a rectangle of a jacket, a big yellow sun over a straight crosswalk. Darius laughed softly. That's accurate, he said. You and your rectangle jacket, Emma teased. He lifted the flowers, inhaled the clean scent, and slid them back carefully. Traffic hummed. A signal chirped, clear and confident. A new day rushed by, slower than it used to be, just fast enough for people to see each other. He took out both keychains, the silver and the gold, felt their different weights, and understood something final. The city had given him a test, and he had answered with the only thing that lasts. Not money, not fame, not even a program. He had answered with a habit. You do right, again and again, especially when no one is clapping. And sometimes, if the world is lucky, a girl who couldn't see finds the safest way home, and a boy who couldn't afford to dream becomes the architect of easier futures. The bench waited. The sign shone. The corner kept choosing. And in that ordinary, extraordinary spot, 2 friends promised themselves, quietly, firmly, like people who know promises are blueprints, that they would never walk past someone who needed help. Not here. Not anywhere. Not ever.